Big data would not be as big unless it was big investment going in from big investors. So that's our VC panel for this evening. Let me invite our speakers and the moderators. So TM Ravi from the Hive. Then we have Ursheet Parikh from Mayfield, Jake Flomenberg from Accel, and Bipul Sinha from Lightspeed.
So we have a bunch of VCs here, and we're going to talk about investing in startups and big data. So maybe we'll start with Jake. Jake just had a big event with one of his companies, Cloudera. Intel invested in them at a valuation of $4.1 billion. What really is driving this kind of valuation? What does it say about the space, or is it just a kind of a fire eye waiting to happen?
Sure. It's hard to pontificate as to why Intel chose to make the investment, but obviously, as a chip manufacturer, you have to imagine that they're looking to figure out what's going to actually drive usage of chips and commodity hardware at larger and larger scale. And the realization that Hadoop is going to ultimately be the repository for probably at least half the world's data at some point in time, makes this a really interesting platform to get closer to. When I think about the valuation, is it fair? Of course, they underpaid. It's worth far more. But the thing that I think people have to realize is the value of Hadoop as a platform is going to be limited without an ecosystem of apps on top of it to drive value to the business user. If you think about what an early inning we are at this point in time, Hadoop is probably 3 to 5% penetrated. In most across at least the U.S. in terms of how many people actually understand how to use it. The business apps have not yet been built. And if we take a step back to the relational database era, it was really the advent of all of the apps that sat on top of anti-SQL in that particular case that spoke to the database, which is what drove that ecosystem to be such a tremendous value. And I think we're still at the cusp, and most of that is still yet to happen.
Maybe for a question for all, and we'll start with Ursheet. With what's going on with MongoDB and with Hadoop, do you see sort of maturity in the data infrastructure space? Are there opportunities to start new companies in the space? Would you invest in a new company in the data infrastructure space?
So, let me take your second part of the question first, which is, are there opportunities to build companies and opportunities for investors to invest in companies? I think there's definitely there. I think we're probably not even at the sort of end of the start, right? It's like the first chapter, and as Jake alluded to, that it's the overall penetration of these things is kind of relatively low. In terms of when I look at where would I invest, I end up sort of putting the map into sort of around big data into 4 big buckets from an investment perspective. I think the first area is around infrastructure tools. The second area ends up being around data types and what you can do with data types. The third area being around how you can actually get the needle in the haystack. And I'll explain that. And then the fourth is once you kind of get this needle in the haystack, what kind of smart world can you create out of it? And so on the infrastructure side, what we would often find is that a lot of so there's the application infrastructure stuff like Hadoop and more or less, right, it's roles gone from the single SQL database to many different kinds of database for different types of applications. So yes, besides Hadoop, yes, there's interesting stuff happening in NoSQL. There's interesting stuff happening around Graph and things like that. And then there is about how you bring these different types of databases together for the data analyst to go and do the things that he wants to do for the enterprise. But then the other area of the infrastructure software stack, where there's huge opportunities, really kind of makes you take a pause and see what's happened to the hardware side of the house. When a lot of this great work was done at places like Google and Amazon, the spinning media of hard drives was the big bottleneck. CPUs were much smaller. The number of cores in them was much smaller. Memory pricing was much higher. You kind of fast forward 10 years out, and you can find that the hardware is less of a bottleneck, and actually the bigger bottleneck is the legacy horizontal software stack. And it's pretty amazing, but you can actually take some of these components and create optimized solutions which are truly turning out to be something like 100 times faster than what would have happened otherwise. So this is not just doing new hardware, but leveraging all this amazing hardware that's coming out and redoing specialized software stacks.
Jake, do you, just restating the question, do you see opportunity to invest more in infrastructure software? Do you see some maturity there and you're moving on to other aspects of big data, other areas?
Look, I mean, I think certain pieces of the platform are indeed maturing. Hadoop, for one, is a lot easier to set up and get going. We have a plethora of non-relational data stores that are available for all different kinds of OLTP and OLAP use cases. We're in a period of consolidation and maturation. There's still room on the edges for graph, for atomically synced clocks, for in-memory, but that's on the edge. I think we're seeing the opportunity to move a little bit further up the stack to what I like to call data tooling. What are all the layers first on top of the Hadoop ecosystem that's going to make it more accessible just than map and reduce functions, and we're seeing those projects get built. But where are the ETL solutions, all the things that are going to re-enfranchise the people that understood how to speak SQL and have no idea what to do with a mess of semi-structured data? Where are the search-oriented BI tools on top? And so I think the puck is moving there. You're seeing those bets get placed today, and we're just at the early innings of finding those teams that have that unique combination of domain awareness and understanding of modern data infrastructure to come together and think how that can be really applied to a problem in a deeply verticalized manner.
Got it. Bipul?
I think the whole infrastructure, data infrastructure space, is very hard to build a new data infrastructure because of the application dependency and, I don't know, can you guys? Because of the application dependency and making the interface work for all kinds of applications. So typically an open source project comes along, it starts to build a community, and community gets high velocity, and that's how you build a platform. So I don't think there is a lot of opportunities to build a new platform, but where I see opportunity is to take some of these infrastructure, say Hadoop or Mongo or others, and really verticalize it. So build like an application and vertically integrate the whole stack, because in terms of building tools and other things, I take a slightly different view, because since the penetration is not very high and people are still experimenting with the Hadoop infrastructure, a tool company will find it really hard in the next few years to get significant traction.
So let me just take this one so we can go around. Clearly there's is Hadoop enterprise ready? Maybe, perhaps not. Does it need value-added services and tools? Probably yes. But the real question is there an opportunity to build big companies out of it? Is that a VC fundable effort?
So, going back to the relational database world, right, to the point that Jake was making, you got to ask questions and say, were companies like Quest Software and Informatica that came around?
Or BMC Software or
BMC
whoever.
Software and others that came about, were they sort of good standalone businesses or not? And so we do think that there is that part of the opportunity that is there. It starts. Is that going to be as big as Oracle in its own right? Probably not. But at the same time, are these businesses going to be the kind of companies where you can see a path to the company itself getting $1 billion in revenue as this market kind of expands over the next 6, 8, 10 years? So I'd kind of say that I do think that there are opportunities like that. We find a lot of pull.
In the old world, between management vendors and tool vendors, there were literally 20 public companies. Mm-hmm. Jake, do you see that happening here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a matter of time, quite frankly. I mean, the economics will end up being a little bit different because fundamentally we're offering a much lower dollar per gigabyte or whatever the metric du jour that you want to track is, and that's the nature of the open source beast and just the amount of data that we have to store. But I mean, I'd almost say that some of these data platforms cannot be successful to the extent that Oracle or some of the other relational databases, where without these tools, without data prep, without BI, without verticalized applications, that market can't mature, and that will, in some sense, sort of drag the market along and help it expand, because some people have no idea what to do with a large horizontally scalable data store. But if you say that I can help reduce working capital costs by 3%, I can help solve this security problem, and I happen to leverage Hadoop under the covers to do it. Now that's in your organization, and once you have it in there for a particular use case, you'll generally be inspired to start asking other questions as you start seeing the data, and what else can I do with it, and what other data can I put in there? But you have to see that in some way.
Got it. Maybe just a last question on Hadoop, and then we'll move on to apps and other things. So, clearly there's a lot going on. You mentioned kind of around hardware, new generation of processors coming out from places like Intel, ARM stuff, new networking, memory class storage. Is there a chance that just overnight Hadoop becomes much like what happened in databases, data warehousing? There was just an abrupt shift. Like Hadoop becomes sort of something of the past, and there's a new paradigm. Do you see something like that possible?
I don't think so. I do see new opportunities emerge from that, though. So I mean, if anyone's kind of looking at graduating out of college, starting out their careers, I mean, this is the data operating system of sort of the next several decades. So I don't think Hadoop gets marginalized anytime soon at all. You do see.
You already see Spark, despite sort of the embrace of Cloudera and all the different vendors and Databricks and Apache Spark. You see that they have a lot of components that are replacing Hadoop components.
So that it then kind of comes down to how do we sort of see or define Hadoop, right? And so at least the way I look at it from a customer perspective is when I'm going to go with MapR or Cloudera or Hortonworks, I'm not buying one specific piece of open source project or technology from them. I'm looking at them as these guys being my strategic advisors for this new data world, where wherever the world goes, these guys are going to go ahead and have the right set of tools and at least the data infrastructure assets in their portfolio, especially from open source land, that I can kind of work with them on. And so I think does every sort of hot, cool project become a company? I don't think so. Out on that end, but as I think there are opportunities around, as we talk later, around applications and all of these other things that sort of come about. But just as there is, I do see the fragmentation of the data structures based on what is the purpose that data structure is going to get used for.
Bipul?
I kind of agree with that statement that the Hadoop is not going to be disrupted overnight because it takes long time to build ecosystem. It takes long time to build community, and I think community is behind Cloudera and essentially Hadoop, but essentially the Hadoop the Hadoop ecosystem.
Hadoop equals Cloudera.
I agree.
So the whole Hadoop ecosystem is essentially democratization of distributed computing and giving it in the hands of developers to experiment, to build. It'll take a long time before all the tools are built. And if you go back to the relational database era, relational database grew along with the enterprise business applications. Now enterprise business applications have gotten to a mature state. And for Hadoop ecosystem to start penetrate into enterprise application ecosystem, it requires rich set of tools, which will take a long time, like SQL interface. So we are seeing the reinvention of the relational database interfaces on Hadoop, and it'll go on for a long time. So I don't think it's going to kind of overnight shift or change anything. The new innovation, it'll make it easier, faster, better to store data or to do computation faster. It's just that the whole Hadoop ecosystem to get into the enterprise and remain a mainstay or for it to become a system of record is going to take a long time.
So I want to take a counterpoint on that.
Yeah, closer to the microphone. Yeah.
So I want to take a counterpoint on that, and part of it is because I think what makes this new big data world super interesting is not that people are going to redo everything that they're using right now, but it is what are the kind of things that it allows you to do that kind of transforms businesses that's possible. So it's probably spilling over into the apps part of it, but it's clearly the new generation of apps that have been using this new data infrastructure first, right? I mean, look at Siri or for that matter, Google Cars. These are sort of products of the big data world. I think in the enterprise, if you see all the ad spend that people are doing with Google AdWords, ad analytics ends up being a big area. A lot more around marketing, sales, business process. You look at areas like telecom, and you see companies like Huawei driving decision making. So I think what is happening is that a lot of Hadoop is getting into the enterprise without the enterprise directly buying Hadoop, because they're just buying new category of SaaS solutions which are enabled by these newer technologies. And those will be big opportunities, but they will not just be big opportunities within existing enterprises. It kind of creates this new class of businesses and applications that enterprises just writing checks to buy that stuff is sort of also.
So let's go with the existing enterprises, not the new ones, not the Web 2.0 companies, existing enterprises, and maybe Jake, for you, sort of if you think about line of business processes, kind of functional areas, and data-driven applications new applications that are emerging, disruptive applications. What are the areas that you see where data has the impact sort of the earliest and the most?
Yeah, I mean,
where you would invest in?
To be clear, I think all software will be increasingly data-driven, and people will either the incumbents will either figure out how to adopt or risk being disrupted. I mean, I think we've seen an awful lot in marketing and sales optimization as of late, CRM for sure. I think HR still has a long way to go. I mean, we spend so much time worrying about our own human capital, and the entire hiring and performance review process is just utterly broken and unoptimized in the average company. ERP takes a long time to move and improve, but the amount of data, all the new sensors and mobile technology that can be brought to bear to improve that process. And then there's pools of data that are used for industry, whether it's the exchange formats in financial industries, whether it's government RFPs and some of this open data that's just sitting, and it's unclear how all the economics will play out, but people have to turn that into products and figure out how to offer up something that actually makes someone's life easier, and I think we're starting to see the beginning of that.
So you think pretty much I will stick with the line of business application, everyone gets disrupted, but Bipul, maybe sense of what are the first couple where you'd see sort of the most impact? Eventually everything gets disrupted.
So I'm not that big a believer in number one is this whole big data is a misnomer. Essentially, the whole big data...
Hey, who invited you to this panel?
So this big data is really, if you look at enterprises, they're mostly dealing with small data, which is relational data, this transactional data, and some part of the transactional data they want to analyze, and they want better tools, faster tools, cheaper tools, easier tools. And that's where the opportunity in data analysis, data management, and it really is. If you look at the big data, mostly around Web 2.0 and some of the government data and maybe some advertising system have big data. Nobody else has big data. So I don't believe that the existing line of business applications are going to get disrupted just because there is something called big data. Nobody has big data. Go talk to Bank of America, ask them about big data. They'll say, we have no big data. So essentially, what big data is really about building tools to analyze data faster, cheaper, better, and manage data better. Even in the relational data, you are paying arms and leg to Oracle. You don't have to pay that. You can use data and keep data cheaply. That's where the opportunity is, and that's where enterprises would experiment or will experiment more with Hadoop. They will try to see if they can satisfy their requirements.
So let's take that. So Ursheet is saying it's primarily big data is around commoditization and cost. We'll go down the line. Jake, you have a point of view? Bipul, sorry.
So I mean, I think he's right in the sense that not every problem is a big data problem, but there's a fundamental mindset of being data driven, and how can I create this, this data feedback loop to present the information that users need in a more timely basis. And if you look at what Amazon and Facebook and LinkedIn have done for the consumer experience, and now you look at what we have in the enterprise today, it's largely crap. We've largely taken the same tools that we've had for the last couple decades. We've put, a nice web JavaScript front end on it, and it's the same. We haven't redefined the process. And I think that's the opportunity, in front of us for how can we bring data, big, small, or medium, to bear on the problems to help people get more efficient. And I think there's some incumbents that will figure out how to make that leap, and I think others will struggle.
Ursheet?
Yeah, I think my perspective is kind of closer to Jake's on this one. But if I had to kind of give examples, even within the stodgiest of enterprises, right, financial services, risk modeling, insurance. Hey, you heard those Allstate ads carry this thing that is going to track your driving habits and is going to give you that data, bioinformatics, drug discovery, and then in the horizontal side, right, marketing. Actually, to your point on HR and HR process changing out with the big data, there's companies beginning to happen with that are kind of going ahead and helping people take a lot of the data on people on Google itself, LinkedIn, internal company repositories, GitHub, and sort of help better decisions. So I think that there will be companies that will just end up finding that if they have a certain pain point, there will be somebody who's going to deliver a solution out for them. There's a good chance that for most of the solutions that show up in the next 10 years that people will write checks for, they will be built from the ground up in this new data infrastructure world, and that'll help companies become smarter, and the ones that don't adopt these newer technologies probably won't be there for that long.
Just going to vertical, some of you mentioned vertical application areas, and so so clearly media advertising has been one of the early verticals to kind of leverage big data. Any other verticals that you see are sort of near and immediate in terms of use of data, Bipul?
Certainly. So if you look at the insurance industry, and if you look at the availability of all the Twitter data or Facebook data, if you look at risk analytics around behaviors, things like that, there's a big opportunity around insurance industry. The thing is that verticalization of taking big data technology, getting data from different sources, and giving enterprises selling some kind of service, which is they are not used to, they don't know if they can get benefit from it, but you suddenly come and show them that, look, this is how you reduce your costs, something like that. That could be very useful, and insurance is definitely one big space.
Jake?
I increasingly hope that healthcare becomes one. With all the regulation going on and people having to meet certain milestones and sort of become more metrics orientated to get certain types of reimbursement, I think we're going to see an emerging opportunity for analytic solutions to help with that process, for people to have more data at their fingertips. I mean, if you think about where we are and even choosing a healthcare provider and the amount of data that we as individuals have about those different providers, how much different things cost. I mean, we know more about restaurants today than we know about the people that are going to operate on us. So, I think we're in the early days, but I hope there's more to come.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have anything much more to add on this topic, but on a slightly different, I was looking at the time and that we were going to run out of time soon. And so I do see the horizontal data sets that can kind of drive this next breed of innovation. And this is really with the sheer volume of video, audio, and media content that is getting generated in the world today. And you overlay that with the newer advances that are beginning to happen around machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision. And I do think that sort of data category, we have a company that does drones. And the top apps for those drones really is to kind of collect data, this visual data in different places, and then make decisions on that. This is in agriculture. This is like somebody like Verizon on their cell tower maintenance. So I think
good.
It's just getting started.
IoT, same data stack, different data stack. You want to start? Ursheet, brief answer, so we can go on.
Well, since I touched upon a couple, I think IoT would not really be smart if it wasn't for the big data stuff, right? So that's.
Will it use Hadoop and all this type of stuff, or will there be different?
I do think that a lot of these building blocks will be there, along with newer technologies that come, as I was alluding to, right? Siri is one of the largest big data apps deployed out there, in terms of just the largest Hadoop-based infrastructure deployed.
Jake?
I think it might be a similar data stack, but I think it might be more ML orientated first, in the sense that, I mean, we're not going to be able to look at every bit and byte that's coming across the transom. Like beyond aggregates and anomalies, I think the notion that we're going to look at each individual record, right? We're going to have to sort of throw that out to deal with this data volume that's going to hit us, and then figure out how and when do we go back to that level, and that's probably only going to be if there's something pretty wrong.
Bipul?
I largely agree with what has been said. I think there will be some more innovation on the edge computing also, because network can't take the load of so much data coming from edge going to the data center.
And so you may have more stream processing and local fog processing, whatever it's called, than so maybe just a last kind of comment, just on big data. Many people don't think this is a category or a sector, more like the internet. It's just something that permeates everything. Your sense, you agree, disagree, Bipul?
Yeah, it's kind of like a word that has no meaning. So it's like you combine a bunch of things and throw it into big data. I mean, when I hear big data, I don't understand it till you tell me what you do.
Jake?
I mean, I think it's awfully all-inclusive at this point. I just say, at the end of the day, there's going to be data-driven software and less intelligent software, and I think the data-driven software is going to earn outsized rewards.
On this one, I'll tend to agree a little bit with Bipul, is that I think big data can get very cliched. And so as entrepreneurs, if you're looking at building companies and plans, while you hear this whole breadth of kind of topics covered in this conversation today, I think it becomes very important to pick a very specific sort of problem space and create a very focused solution and think through all the aspects of what it takes to essentially create a product and build a business out of it, and sort of present that out, and not kind of say, oh, if we did this, we could do all of these things, and so that's important to kind of go ahead and, yes, a hot, cool space, a lot of buzzwords, but businesses and products kind of happen with focus.
I'll give you my opinion. I think data is driving better decision making, smarter decisions at scale, real-time decisions, and so it beats sort of internet or mobile, which are access methods. I deeply appreciate your being here today, and the audience